Good evening, I'm Sandra Sully. This is the Late Night News. Heading the Late Night News, the federal government moves to ease the plight of drought-stricken farmers. Rabaul, covered in volcanic ash, awaits a possible tidal wave. And breast cancer, could exercise help prevent it? The size of the federal government's drought relief package has pleased and surprised farming groups. The government has promised $164 million over 2 years. It's aimed to ease the burden on farmers suffering from one of the worst droughts in the country's history.
Like drought-breaking rains, the federal government's hand up for farmers has been a long time coming, but much appreciated when it finally arrived. Paul Keating says the drought assistance will serve the dual purpose of looking after the national economy and
meeting the commitment not to leave farm families in distressed circumstances behind.
All of the assistance will go to farms in Queensland and northern New South Wales.
There are around 12,000 families currently, farmers out of about 125,000, that are in extreme difficulty. And they are the people that this package is designed to help.
The main features of the package are interest-free loans of up to $100,000 under the Rural Adjustment Scheme, the elimination of the assets test for Austudy, and cash payments of up to $400 a week for basic necessities.
A large part of the money is being directed towards families, and that's terribly important.
The Prime Minister says the package embraces a revolutionary change to social policy. And it does in the sense that the assets test, which is central to Labor Party policy, has been abolished, albeit for a particular group in extreme difficulties. But even that made some of the hardheads in Cabinet a little nervous. But by all accounts, Mr Keating was persuaded of the need for dramatic action when he visited the drought-ravaged farms late last week. So the money will flow almost immediately, but for how long is anyone's guess.
And the Weather Bureau is predicting that there may not be significant easing of the situation across Australia until March next year.
Barry Cassidy, 10 News.
Good news tonight for Australia's lowest paid workers. They've been awarded pay increases of up to $24 a week, staggered across 2 years. But the decision has angered employers, who warn more workers could be headed for the dole queue.
The Commission ordered the $24 be paid to workers who've not had access to enterprise agreements. The payments will be staggered over 2 years, the first payment from tomorrow.
I think that on balance, the national wage decision is one that will be welcomed by the trade union movement. It clearly establishes a capacity for us to look after the poor in the community, the lower paid.
But the employers are angry, claiming the pay rises will hurt the economic recovery and possibly increase unemployment.
Very disappointed. For employers, there is really nothing in the decision, and the Commission has made available a series of wage increases which will simply undermine the progress of enterprise bargaining.
This decision doesn't surprise me. The Commission is bound by the Act. The Act was a payoff to the unions. Martin Ferguson got what he asked for.
The Commission's rationale for the pay rises, the economic recovery is now well established and there is strong potential for growth. It described the pay rises as modest.
There can be nothing modest about a series of increases which total $24.
Their response would do Scrooge proud. Australia currently has strong economic growth, we have company profits at record levels, and we have the salaries of senior managers on the way up.
It's not known exactly how many workers will get the full $24, but the Commission ruled against double dipping, saying workers who've already received pay rises will have them offset against today's decision. It was a two-fisted blow for employers. Not only are they facing wage increases, the Commission also ruled out a radical streamlining of awards. Instead, it opted for a pilot award review program. One workers are promised will not reduce awards to basic core entitlements. Alan Russell, 10 News.
Another blow to the Australian Rugby League tonight as 2 former players face a Sydney court on firearms charges. South Sydney player John Elias and former St George captain Michael Beattie have been charged with possessing machine gun parts and bulletproof vests. Elias also faces drug charges.
The 2 men were arrested after a police undercover operation at a Sydney storage depot. 31-year-old former South Sydney player John Elias faces 17 charges over the possession of 6 military machine guns and 6 flak jackets. It's alleged he tried to sell the firearms and vests to an undercover policeman. Elias is also charged with possessing and supplying amphetamines. Former St George club captain Michael Beattie is also facing charges over the possession of military guns and flak jackets. Beattie, who retired in 1992, had been in financial trouble since the collapse of a business venture. Last week, John Elias, a former undertaker, denied knowledge of an illegal betting scam involving Sydney Rugby League players.
The hearing lasted just 15 minutes. John Elias will reappear in court in the morning. Michael Beattie was granted bail and will face the magistrates again in October. Peter Lloyd, 10 News.
In Western Australia, a senior Labor MP has resigned from the Shadow Ministry amid claims that party campaign funds were used to pay off his gambling debts. David Smith says he borrowed $40,000 from the party, money he's promised to repay.
David Smith resigned from the Shadow Cabinet, telling colleagues he understood his actions had hurt and embarrassed the party. Only moments before, the Shadow Attorney-General had been named in federal Parliament as the Labor MP whose gambling debts had been paid off with Labor campaign donations. During the recent trial of former Deputy Premier David Parker, Labor Senator Michael Behan revealed that campaign funds had once been used to pay off a candidate's gambling debts because the party feared embarrassment if news of his predicament leaked out. That candidate, now revealed as David Smith, he not only went on to win his election, but became a Minister for Justice in the Lawrence government. Mr Smith revealed to Eyewitness News this afternoon that he'd borrowed $40,000 from the Labor Party on the understanding that he paid it back. He also admitted he was a gambler, but claimed not all of his financial problems were related to gambling. Opposition leader Ian Taylor was unavailable for comment. Kieran Murphy, 10 News.
Cooler weather brought some relief today for firefighters in New South Wales and Queensland, but authorities say alert conditions are likely to remain into the weekend. In New South Wales tonight, 4 regions are still declared emergencies as firefighters continue to battle almost 60 different blazes.
Light rain early this morning brought some relief, but only temporarily.
What we need is a few inches of rain and not just a trickle like we're getting now.
Overnight, at least 2 more fires were deliberately lit north of Wollongong. As volunteers began backburning to save homes near Austinmere, residents expressed anger at the arsonists.
Kids lit it.
Yeah, how do you feel about that?
Oh, I'd like to catch them, I'd throw them in the bloody fire.
Nearby, more than 100 children were evacuated from a Christian conference centre before a big blaze was brought under control. Although conditions along the coast are easing tonight, emergency declarations remain in place at Port Macquarie, Taree, Port Stephens and Cessnock. North of the border, firefighters are also dealing with a line of fires as far north as Rockhampton. Authorities say conditions are ripe for one of the worst bushfire seasons on record, but they're urging people not to panic.
We're heading into a difficult fire season, but it's not a disaster.
Among Queensland's worst fires today, volunteers battled through the night until midday to save more than 100 homes near Caloundra on the Sunshine Coast. Sean Murphy, 10 News.
With smoke, ash and debris still pouring from volcanoes on the Papua New Guinea island of New Britain, the threat of tidal waves has added to the danger. Although the town of Rabaul is deserted, those evacuated are gathered on the island's coast and vulnerable to rising sea levels. Peter Kelly filed this report a short time ago.
For the 3rd successive day, volcanoes spew rock and ash over Rabaul, the thunder echoing across the harbour. Evacuees are still being moved to safety. Despite relief efforts, many still have no food or water. There's nothing they can do but stand and watch the spectacle. The town is devastated, buried under a layer of ash and pumice. This is the main road into Rabaul. It's split by a giant subsidence. Abandoned dogs sift through the rubble looking for food. Today they were joined by a handful of people doing the same thing. There have been reports of looting, but all those I spoke to said they were looking only for food.
We're just coming to check our houses and pick up some food.
Behind me is what the tourist brochures described as the picturesque Rabaul harbour. Now, if you throw a rock into the water, it sits on top. From the air, it looks like a desert, large rocks littering a blanket of pumice. The harbour and its port are the reasons this town exists. How well they recover will decide Rabal's future. But many people are already planning to rebuild their lives at the nearby village of Kokopu.
You could still see people, you know, that was still further back there, of course, where the ash had actually quite devastating because all the trees and branches were all stripped. We're still there, still shoveling, trying to shovel as much ash off the roofs as possible, and they didn't look like they were in any hurry to move anywhere. I think we've been through quite a few disasters, and this one's certainly not going to break us.
Seismologists still can't say how long the eruptions are likely to last. Certainly there's still no end in sight. Peter Kelly in Rabal for 10 News.
After the break, beating breast cancer, the experts say exercise could be the key. And Haiti, how US troops are forced to stand by as local police lay down the law. Indonesia's Vice President General Tri Sutrisno has begun an official 3-day tour of Australia. It's the most senior diplomatic visit from Indonesia in almost 20 years. At Sydney Airport, there was a formal welcome for the man who also heads Indonesia's armed forces. But at his city hotel, protesters waited to show their anger at what they say is the president's ongoing role in human rights violations against the people of East Timor. General Sutrisno avoided the demonstrators by using a rear door before a courtesy visit from the New South Wales Premier, John Fahey. Visiting Irish Prime Minister Albert Reynolds has welcomed Australia's $7 million contribution to the Northern Ireland peace settlement. Mr Reynolds says the money will ensure a lasting ceasefire in the province.
It's standard for visiting leaders to stop at the War Memorial, but for Ireland's Albert Reynolds, war is not yet a memory. It's the subject that's dominating his tour here. Overnight, Australia promised $7 million over 5 years to an international peace fund in Ireland.
Because Australians love Ireland, they hate the war that goes on there.
Today, the Irish leader dismissed British government doubts about the Northern Ireland ceasefire.
What is important is that it is over and it is for good. And then we're into the third week, and I think that as the weeks go by, everybody will be convinced.
The next step will be to disarm the paramilitary groups.
There's far too much arms, there's far too much bombs, far too much bullets in the whole society in Northern Ireland on both sides, so inevitably it's logical that they have to be taken away and destroyed.
Mr Reynolds estimates that 40% of Australians have an Irish ancestor, which creates a special bond between the two countries. And he believes that our Prime Minister benefits from an Irish streak in his personality.
It has always been a good part and parcel of Irish make-up that we were good fighters, we were good battlers, whether it was in the political field or whether it was on any other fields. So I think he possesses that from...
The Irish leader also visits Melbourne and then Sydney during the week-long tour. Paul Smith, 10 News.
Haiti's interim government has banned street protests after a man was beaten to death by police. American soldiers could do nothing but look on as the brutality took place. They're under orders to let the locals do the job of maintaining order.
A contingent of 2,000 US Marines landed in the northern port of Cape Haitian today, swelling the American occupation force to over 6,000 troops. Again today, the soldiers encountered no resistance. In the capital Port-au-Prince, crowds of Haitians returned to welcome the American build-up. But when police began dispersing groups of Aristide supporters, violence erupted. Emboldened by the presence of American troops, the mobs taunted police and threw rocks. Police responded with batons and tear gas. One man apparently was beaten to death while soldiers stood by, restrained by their rules of engagement.
It's going to have to change because I know we're not just going to 12 here to sit around.
With American troops now working in concert with the armed thugs they denounced only last week, many Haitians see nothing has changed.
When we say we went out, see they try to beat you, they kill you, they come in the night in your house.
Also disillusioned by the agreement is the man military action will restore to power. In a statement released today, there was no endorsement from exiled President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, sparking cries of ingratitude from Washington.
How dare that insolent man take objection?
The proper response is 2 words: thank you.
The Clinton administration also is annoyed with Jimmy Carter over the embarrassment the former president apparently expressed to the Haitian leaders over the harm US-imposed economic embargo has caused the impoverished island. Andrew Warren, 10 News.
British Prime Minister John Major has touched down in South Africa, the first British leader to do so in more than 30 years. Sir Harold Macmillan was there in 1960 to deliver his famous speech predicting independence for Africa. Today, John Major pledged millions of dollars to help build the country post-apartheid. Accompanied by his wife Norma and a delegation of sporting and business people, Mr Major told the Parliament that aid would be granted over the next 3 years. Now to some good news on the health front. A new study in the United States has found a link between breast cancer and exercise. Researchers believe a little bit of exercise can go a long way in the fight against the deadly disease.
Researchers studied 545 women diagnosed with breast cancer at age 40 or younger and matched them with women who did not have cancer.
What we found was that the most important factor was their lifetime participation in exercise activities.
Women who exercised 1 to 2 hours a week had about a 20% reduction in risk. Women who exercised 4 hours or more had a 60% reduction. The researchers found that